So, welcome everyone to our latest installment of a casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and I'm a world designer for Lord of the Rings. We wanted to use this stream as an opportunity to introduce players to the world of Middle Earth, world of Lord of the Rings Online, and kind of walk through regions and kind of give you a little bit of a behind-the-scenes take on what went into making these regions, and answer all of your questions regarding world design. Like we said before, this is a world design focused stream. We're not going to be answering questions on things like game systems or content. That's not my area, and I'm not really comfortable, handling those topics. There are certainly other opportunities for you to get those questions answered via Cordovan's Friday streams or directly on the message boards. So, without further ado, welcome to the Shire. We posted up our poll last week, and it started out looking like either Trollshaws or Enedwaith were going to duke it out to see who won. And then, kind of from behind, the Shire overtook and became the winner for this week. So we're very happy to walk through the Shire. It's actually one of the first regions that I worked on between Eredluin and the Shire. These were kind of the two areas of the game that I actually did design work for. And there's also a lot of very, very old actual artwork that I created when I was a production artist for Lord of the Rings. Way, way back in the day before I transitioned over into design. It makes me cringe a little bit every time I see these things still in use, but there's also a little bit of 2005-y charm to those assets. All right, so I'm being reminded not to get excited because my audio could decide to kill me at any moment. Yeah, I mean, that's how audio goes. So to get things started, we are here in Little Delving. This is the landing pad for Hobbit players after they've completed their introductory experience, after they get through Archet. They journey to Little Delving, a little pocket village to the northwest of Michael Delving. It's where players kind of get their first taste of the Shire. We're introduced to some of the early bartering mechanics as well, and a guy who's a mannequin that is dressed up in his finest Assassin's Creed outfit. So Little Delving was an area that I don't think we had originally planned to include in the version of the Shire that we were planning to launch with Lord of the Rings. When the game was originally being built and worked on as Middle Earth Online, basically the entirety of the Shire was something that was in consideration. All of the farthings everywhere, and I have there are remnants of some of those still kicking around in game, and we'll go and take a look at some of them, prepared to be underwhelmed, later on in this. So first question up, Blueberry Bear asks, how do you decide the diversity of foliage, and are there limits on what you can include? Well, typically, deciding on types of foliage, trees, plants, grass, flowers, all of that sort of thing, it's a component to the region personality and region research that we do when we start working on an area in the game. Our lore folks do a very, very deep dive into what would be appropriate for the areas of the world that a given place is meant to kind of mimic. The idea behind Middle Earth is that it is a historic, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away kind of version of Earth itself. So we try to make sure that the things that we represent in our landscapes are things that could be represented in the actual real world analogs for these spaces. There's also in lore very often specific flowers, specific plants that are called out as being used by or seen by peoples in these areas. Could that waterfall be updated now? So all of those things are kind of like opportunities for us to go back when we have time. I think we in 2003, 2004, when we were originally building these things, like those waterfalls looked amazing to us, and certainly now they do look a bit dated. And it's just a matter of like, do we have the time available, and is the effort to update things and to adjust their placement and whatnot, like, is it, how much does that gain for us? um, Not to say that we don't want to see everything updated in some fashion as we progress through the game. It's just some things are tougher to do than others, particularly things like waterfalls, which are generally not just a single asset. They're usually several smaller individual pieces that come together to form a more cohesive object. And updating the artwork on one can have some significant trickle down effects on everywhere where it's placed in the world. So we have to be very careful about how we go about updating things, how we go about changing the artwork on things, because we could, change the artwork on a rock, for example, and then all of a sudden that change in the artwork changes the footprint of what kind of space it covers, or if a designer placed a quest item that previously looked like it fit on the rock, but now the new version of the rock, it's like either floating off of or embedded within the rock. So it's those kinds of things we have to be very aware of and very careful of. So Blueberry Bear also says that they really enjoyed the last Shire update with all the pretty sunflowers added. Sunflowers were certainly a controversial thing that was added to the Shire. And by the way, for those who haven't been in this, who are just joining us, we're doing a run through of the Shire today. There are some folks that weren't quite sure that they were meant to fit in the region. There are some that were hoping for them to be a little bit more dynamic in how they behaved, and that have them always facing where the sun's facing, which is not a simple task. So let's see, other questions. Rudy Keeper says, I love the Shire, but would love to see Tuckborough and Buckland always. To see Tuckborough and Buckland always felt a bit underwhelming from what I imagined. Yeah, I think there's certainly a challenge in representing spaces that feel like they are full, lush towns without making them feel too crowded. And I think the Shire in particular had some challenges because we were trying to condense the whole experience of the Shire into something that was a little bit smaller than we really had space for. The Shire is a very large, sprawling region of landscape in lore, but we had to build the space, and we intentionally built the space a little bit more compressed, so that you weren't spending, days upon days trying to get from point A to point B. So sometimes that means that towns feel like they're too close together, particularly in the Shire. That may mean that some villages and towns aren't represented as fully as they could or should be. Waymeet is an example of that, where we knew it existed. We had it on the maps. We knew it was there, but because Michael Delving and Hobbiton and Tuckborough were all so close together, it was really hard for us to think about adding in a whole other town, which is why Waymeet has kind of turned into this more of a way station wagon village than an actual full built up hobbit village. So we'll go through here a little bit more. Another question is, are there any place in the Shire that you guys update construction like in Thornley's worksite? Not really. We've done those larger, broader deco passes to kind of spruce up the region. But the idea of like Thornley's worksite, being a place that's under perpetual construction, we don't really have anything like that here in the Shire. Maybe the Scary Quarry is the closest to that we could think of, but even then, that's not a good exact example. So Timble Tunuk, and again, I apologize if I butcher anyone's names. Says, I'm the opposite to that. I really love the LOTRO Shire. It took all the essence of the books, and yeah, it's smaller, but I'm fine with that. Yeah, and that I think is something that we have to balance with any region that we make. We have to make sure that we represent the region, but we also don't want it to be so overwhelmingly massive that it's a drag to get through. The Shire looks great, it's beautiful, but it can take some time to get through it, especially as Edith Eldora noted. There's not a lot for swift travel options here in the region. The swift travel thing is actually something that's kind of on my great big long laundry list of things that I would like to address in the future, and go back to some of our older regions and give them a better and more robust travel network. I think the mentality for regions like the Shire and Bree and Ered Luin was very much grounded in keeping players in the world and encouraging them to experience the landscape and not really being as respectful of their time as we could be. Walking up to the Hobbit neighborhood. We'll go and take a look at that a little bit later as we get through things. So wanting to be respectful of people's time was something now that we're very aware of when we're trying to build out regions and travel networks and making sure that players can kind of get where they want to get while still giving them the option to progress through a region at their pace. It's one of the reasons why we still maintain the slow travel networks, because there's something nice about being able to just get on the horse and kind of do a tour of the region without having to worry about where you're going. And the Shire is definitely a space that one could use more stable masters to provide ease of travel, and it could use just more swift travel in general, both to and from the various towns in the region and elsewhere in the world. Let's see. Looking at other questions. So, is there a plan to make a transition from Ered Luin to the Shire not require a loading screen? It is a thing of mine that I would absolutely love to do for the game. It's been something that when we launched the game, I never really felt great about. But we were more focused on moving the game forward. Certainly something that, should we ever have the time for it, I would love to do it. And I think there are opportunities similar to like things like we did with Wildwood to add to the world in that way. Not sure when we'll get to be able to do that, or if we'll be able to get to do that, but it is certainly something that many of us on the world team in particular, but in the content and game team in general would like to see. Druid's Fire asks, is there an Easter egg you snuck into the Shire, and how long did it take for players to find it and call it out? So I did not add any Easter eggs when I was working on the Shire. However, I did add something that remained undiscovered, something recently that remained undiscovered for a few months, and I was very, very pleased with that. Um, we added the quick post interior to the Shire, and it kind of just snuck it in. Made with Lions had some story machinations for it in relation to Shady Acres, and so it just so happened that I was able to get the work for the interior done and get it live in an update prior, and I didn't hadn't seen any like notice or conversation regarding its addition. Because I think a lot of times people tend to look at these older regions and think, they're not really places that are going to evolve or change all that much because we try to keep the stories that are happening in the regions sort of locked in time. So they don't expect or anticipate little additions like that. And I know some people really like to see things like that in the patch notes. I personally like to add stuff like that in as like a nice treat for people that might be out exploring or might be going to discover things on their own. Taking their time to run through a region that they hadn't been to a while, and they might get that little pleasant surprise. It's the same kind of thing with the Breland revamps that had done and the stuff that we've done in Angmar, where it wasn't really felt like it was necessary to call out all of the changes that were made to those areas because we wanted to have it be something new and interesting for players to discover as a reward for either starting a new character or for going back to revisit those older places. Let's see. If you add swift travel, please keep the slow options. I'm planning on it. Odd that there is from housing areas. So the housing swift travels are actually a fairly new addition. They were to address a feedback point with people asking for better access to the neighborhoods. So I think between adding in travel routes to the housing neighborhoods for the original housing neighborhoods, the Breland, the Shire, and two Arid Luin neighborhoods, it helps to kind of improve the visibility into those areas. It helps address that. We've also added in an interior into Breetown, the broker's office, where you can go there and talk to all of the brokers and visit all of the neighborhoods from that one space. So it helps make housing a little bit more accessible to everyone, particularly if they're unfamiliar with the world itself. Let's see. Let's check through things. How many regions / quest pack away is Arid Luin from the Shire? And Arid Luin and the Shire are all part of free to play, right? So let's bring up the map. Oh, hold on, I gotta unhide my UI to bring up the map. So we'll bring up the map here, and we can kind of look at things. Now this map is not 100% accurate to the world that we have. It's a little bit fictionalized to how the layout of everything is, but we have the Shire here, right smack dab, kind of in the middle of everything, and then we have Arid Luin here. So there is a good chunk of space, in this area that it is not a small amount of space, nor is it a large amount of space. Again, I had kind of mentioned a wild woody kind of thing for it. It's possible that sometime in the future that we could do something similar to the wildwood here to fill in that gap. I don't think we will see the Tower Hills for a while because the Tower Hills have a very specific role in the story of Middle Earth, and we're not quite ready to get to that point yet. Do any of your teams play in, let's say, hardcore or these festival thingies and not raiding? So Fumikal, I'm not quite sure I understand the the specifics of this question. Um, so unfortunately, I'm not sure I can really answer that for you. I will say that our team is made up of a variety of different gamers with a variety of different experiences. Some of us prefer a more casual style of gameplay. Some of us are ardent fans of endgame content. So we have a variety of representation of gameplay styles on the team. And that really does help us kind of drive some of our decisions, and it helps us keep the diversity of kinds of content that we're offering over the course of, updates in the course of years kind of available in that way. Bruinor says it was a really nice touch to give names to all NPCs, such as stable masters in early regions. Of course, it would be a pain to name everyone now with the huge number of NPCs, but in Bree, there's a mix of named and unnamed, and it kind of breaks the immersion. That is an unfortunate side effect of just sustainable practices. We would in the original game name basically every NPC. So every NPC, every vendor, like everything got its own unique name. The problem with that is you start using up good names on fairly, for the lack of a better word, inconsequential characters. And we found that it served us better to try to be a little bit more generic in things like vendor names. And to save the names themselves for characters that players are going to bond with and build relationships with. Like it's great and it helps for the immersion certainly, but it's harder for us to be like, okay, and now we're going to do this thing and we're going to name this person this, and you're like, oh wait, but the person that sells manure for crafting in this town is also named that, so we can't use that name. So that's why we've kind of skewed more towards that. It also helps kind of streamline implementation a little bit. It lets people make the NPCs that they need to make just as part of standard town services without kind of delaying the implementation while we wait for a lore name for those characters. All right, let's continue on with some more questions. Where did I first log in when the game launched? So my first server when the game launched, I played on Brandywine as a Hobbit burglar. So Little Delving was where I started my gameplay experience. I don't currently play that burglar anymore, even though I've transferred him off to other servers. When I started playing again, when I came back to work at SSG, and I've since focused on working on Bjorning and a Guardian, which are very different kinds of gameplays from playing a burglar. I love the burglar. I think he's a lot of fun. I remember the days of beta when I could main tank, main heal, main DPS, and main crowd control for a Fornost 6-person instance. That was always a lot of fun. We've since balanced the burglars away from that. Edith Aldora says it's more immersion breaking to have stable masters change appearance but not name. Yeah, the random appearance stuff I think is helpful for us to very quickly make a crowd of characters. For NPCs that do not have a specific name, I would say just imagine, if they change appearance, it's someone else has taken over the shift at the bank or at the auction house, or at the stable masters stand. Exogenius says, do you find yourself staring at parts of the Shire and thinking, I can't wait to scour this? I think everyone on the team kind of would enjoy doing it a little bit as a guilty pleasure. Though I don't think any of us are, much like the Tower Hills, I don't think any of us are really quite ready to get there yet, because there are other places to go and things to do in Middle Earth that we want to explore first. Um, Shipping Orange says about housing, because it got mentioned. What I noticed is that Hobbit housing seems to have fewer furniture hooks than Dwarf housing hooks or Elven housing hooks. It's very visible in Kinship's house. Are there ever plans to make this housing more cozy, add more hooks, or will they stay the way they are? So Shipping Orange, we tend to be very cautious about changing existing neighborhoods. We don't want to, take something that someone might be very happy with, and force them to have to change it. Um, our general preference is to introduce new features and to work on um, coming up with consistent hook practices as we introduce new housing things. And I know that sounds a little cruel, considering that most our new housing offerings have been premium houses, um, but we're kind of using those as our way to figure out how we want to kind of solidify our hook rules and our house rules, and that's something that honestly, like, I've kind of taken up as my task and am actively working towards, is kind of codifying what housing is and kind of what rules it follows for things like hooks, trying to think about ways to take the variety of hook types that we have and consolidate them down. It's not going to be a simple or quick process. It's a lot of me doing prototype work and soliciting feedback, and it's something that maybe at some point in the future we'll be able to roll out with a test case, with a new neighborhood that can kind of show what our intents are. For free to play housing in specifically, I would say the expectation for that should be to not have high expectations of the amount of hooks being available for them to ever be as high as a premium house. But if there are inconsistencies in the number of hooks, which I thought at the time we had avoided that, and I thought we had managed to make sure that there was parity amongst hook types. Now, there may be issues with where those hooks are placed, because all interiors are slightly different, so that there may be problems there. But again, that's something that is tricky to address without the risk of changing a space that someone already owns and loves. So we'll get a nice view of Bag End while I take a look at some more of these questions and the Saxville Bag Ends camped outside. Question about housing. Are there any chance that we could do something about the smallest houses? They remain empty in most all areas. Possible to allow players to own two in a starter race housing. I've seen a few requests for coming up with solutions on the message boards. I've seen a few requests to find ways to change that, to kind of help that out. And I've had a few ideas of my own. Some of those are going to require engineering support. And we've got our plate full with other larger engineering things that need to be resolved. My hope is to still be able to find the time to give the housing communities attention and love. We try to do deco updates pretty regularly, and I am always working on different ideas for ways that we can improve housing that then we kind of have to figure out where they slot into the schedule. But the hope is that we can do more work for housing over time, to make it more appealing across everything. Uh, so, is there talk about opening South Gondor as Adventures of Thorngill? So that is, we've got ourselves to the point in the story where Aragorn has just gotten married to Arwen. Spoilers if you have not already done the after or the Midsummer Minas Tirith epic story. Um, and as far as how that goes in the lore, like that was kind of the like breather before he launches his campaigns across, to the south, across the southern and southeastern regions of Middle Earth. So I wouldn't be surprised if we headed that way. Right now, we're focused on getting through Gundabad. We've had some high level conversations about where we're going next, but those directions and destinations are we're not ready to talk about them at the moment. So we are here in Brockenborings, or not Brockenborings, Overhill. Sorry, we're heading towards Brockenborings. This is one of my favorite little villages. I just love this house up here. This is just such a nice little manor. One of my favorite screenshots too that I constructed for marketing back in the day was all focused around this and the two little ponds. Sorry, I'm waxing nostalgic. So it'd be nice to be able to have just hooks and not limit them to certain types of housing items. It's very constricting to have empty house hooks because I don't have anything for them. And that's, I think, one of the things that I would like to do is look into changing certain hook types to allow them to use more things. The way certain hooks rotate makes it only really useful for certain types of items, unfortunately. So the concept of specific styles and types of hooks probably isn't going to go away, but I want to see what I can do to kind of ease some of the restrictions on hooks and what items can be used in them. Let's see, are there any flying mounts in the game? No, there are not flying mounts in the game, and I am very opposed to flying mounts in this game for a few reasons. I think everyone, when they think of flying mounts and they think of Lord of the Rings, they think, oh, well, I could get an eagle. And eagles are kind of like too proud, too regal, and too important to really be turned into a common mount. On top of that, there's just the world design implications of flying mounts. If we were to have flying mounts, a lot of what we do as far as world building goes would have to be increased. We would have to build out further than we typically build out for a region, because we would need to be able to make sure that the world looks good when you're up in the air. So I think it's really for those two reasons that we're probably not going to have flying mounts in Lord of the Rings. I don't want to say never, but it's a very highly unlikely thing. Sagron, yes, I'm just seeing your question. This is a developer stream. If you just joined in, my name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards. I'm a world designer for Lord of the Rings, and my focus is purely on like world design, dungeon design, and landscape design. Though I do dabble in housing. Housing's my baby project system. Right. So LOF mentions that there's one area that you can use eagles as stable masters effectively. The stables or the eagles will transport you from Kirok to the Eyrie and to Lindleby, and those are very very specific locations for the eagles to travel to, and they're very related to the story that's going on in those spaces. Um, so to talk about Shire a little bit more, here we are in the scary quarry. This is one of those things where it's like I look at the space now compared to when we launched it, and I remember being like really satisfied with how this looked when Lord of the Rings came out, and now I just kind of look at it and I'm like, oh, like this needs some love. Um, Probably not an area that we will get back to give it some love, just because, you know, unless there's a reason for us to return to and polish, um, we are not likely to do that, unfortunately. Um, Again, we're looking to move forward with the game. Let me slow this down. I do remember coming in here with my burglar and just dying. Like, someone ran in here and got way over their heads, and they just came flying up the tunnel with like a line of, you know, 6 spiders right behind them. I foolishly like tried to snag at least one of them off of the guy because he was getting low on health, and I also had spider kills for a quest, and that just got them all on me, and they just wiped me out. Lesson learned. Funnily enough, when I was playing my Bjorning and was running around in Archit, I actually did the same thing and tried to save someone with my Bjorning, and then got stomped by a dungeon full of angry spiders. All right, let's see. A few more questions before we continue on with this run up the hill. I see other people are not a fan of flying mounts either, so um, Sauron, yes, the instance finder is limited to the people that are physically on the server that you're on. And so you will not be able to look beyond other servers. I know there's been requests for kind of a more global grouping system, and I know other games do that. I can't speak to when or if something like that is even going to be a possibility. It's not my field of expertise. Is there a hidden village in the Shire like Forest Shell? There is. Once we get through this, or the remaining portions of the Shire, I've got a list of places that we're going to go check out. Some of them are places that are very storied in the history of at least the game side of things for Lord of the Rings Online. Nothing that players have ever actually gone to as far as playable content. I know there are some people that have managed to sneak their way there. Some of it is remnants from our 2005 E3 demo. So we'll take a look at these. The level of polish in those spaces is basically nothing, and I think to some degree that's kind of been like ruined as we've gone through with various revamps and changes to things. But we'll still go take a look at them so that you can kind of see a little bit of the history of the game from the development side of things. Edith Eldora, the quest in Scariest Quarry may have at one point been a small fellowship quest. I'm not sure at the time how clearly we labeled those things. So Budgeford is another village that like has a fond bit in my heart. I love the storyline here about the hobbit that dresses up in the Black Rider's cape and is terrorizing the village. I think that's a fun little thing. It also does something that we don't really do that often nowadays, in that it had content that was only available at nighttime. Typically we try to have our content available at all times so that you're not forced to kind of sit and wait in order to participate in it. But every once in a while, something like that is just fun and adds a little bit of interesting flavor to the game. That scary Nazgul. I mean, one of the things that is, I think, great about the Shire is, especially if you're playing as a Hobbit, it does a very good job of weaving the beginnings of the Lord of the Rings into your gameplay experience. You're introduced very early on to Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin, and you get to kind of really be involved in the story of the game as effectively as a side character to Frodo and Sam, and that kind of launches you into your own adventures. Your happenstance, your chance encounter on the road, as we say, uh, really launches you into the Shire and into Breland and into the epic story. And the Shire has the best taverns for pub crawl. Yeah, the Shire actually, with all of the villages and towns we built for the Shire, one of the things that we very specifically wanted to make sure we did was get a lot of little taverns and pubs in here, because that's such like Shire character. Like, just as much as the mail delivery and the pie quests, the taverns and inns of the Shire are a major component to it. Now, walking around in this interior does remind me, and one of the places we might go to, if I grabbed the right location for it, one of the places we might go to is a very proto version of the assets that would eventually become the Hobbit interior set. It's funny because, like, often, these ceilings always seem very high for hobbits themselves. I mean, they look to be at least 3 times higher than a hobbit. And the real reason why we did that was so that a player of any race could be in here with a camera positioned like how I have mine positioned, and not feel like they were always bumping into a ceiling. Most of our early interiors, regardless of the region that they're in, all kind of take that into mind. I think we played with that a little bit as time progressed, and we're a little bit more okay with being kind of restrictive with the camera. But the Shire interiors, the Hobbit interiors themselves, are a very like prominent example of the thought process that we had as far as making sure that the camera worked within the game. The Shire is so innocent, yet it has some of the most sadistic deeds in the game. Yeah, and honestly, like, the Shire is very innocent, but there are several storylines that we had planned that were really kind of like brutal stories as far as the Shire goes. Maybe that's part of why they were cut. There were stories of brigands kidnapping hobbits. There was a much greater darkness influencing the region than ultimately there ended up being. And I think by virtue of us kind of stepping back and thinking about like how we want to approach the Shire, it helped us realize that we didn't need to have these pieces of dark, heavy content everywhere in the Shire. Like, I think having a few hints of it here and there works to indicate the world around the players. But I think it's better. I think the Shire is better for it to maintain that content innocence. All right. Why go for Derelict Inns? Both the Forsaken Inn and the one in Frogmorn are in bad state of repair. So the one in Frogmorton is really just to add additional flavor. I mean, Frogmorton is built right on the water, so it's not unsurprising that it would be damaged, each season and would need to have repairs happen. Um, I think too, we with Frogmorton anyways, we wanted to make sure that we were selling a specific kind of character to make it distinct from other towns. So the inn itself and all the surrounding buildings kind of have that same kind of weathered and waterlogged feel to it. Um, one of the things that I'm reminded of as I'm running around in the Shire right now is just how different our world design practices are now, at least as far as divvying up who works on what. Working in the Shire, I think we had a team of 5 of us, and we were all, working on little chunks of it here and there. And as the game grew and as the game got older, and honestly, as we got more experience in building landscapes, we kind of grew what our little chunks were, and they got bigger and bigger and bigger to the point now where, like, we'll have one person dedicated to working on something the size of Elderslade or something the size of, Ironfold, um, as opposed to having several people. And this allows us to kind of, spread out and work on other bigger things too, and start like preparing other things or polishing other things, without having to worry about choking our resources too much. So we have Fumusil says, so rumor says game engine is 2002, and not much improved after that. So a little history on the game engine that's running behind Lord of the Rings Online. When the products are being operated by Turbine, this is the engine that would become the Lord of the Rings engine, had its origins all the way back in a game called Asheron's Call. That's the first version of the engine. The engine was then kind of revamped and revitalized and used for a game called Asheron's Call 2. And then from there, new versions of the engine were kind of iterated on and built upon. We had a new version of the engine that was made for this game. There's a slightly different version of the engine that's used for the other game we operate. Infinite Crisis, which was a MOBA operated by Warner Brothers and Turbine, is on yet a different version of the game, version of the engine. And these versions are all different because of the needs of the game. And then for us now, we're still tweaking and improving and adjusting the version of the engine that we're using currently. We've introduced the per pixel lighting attenuation not too long ago, which is a huge change for lighting in the game. It's not as impactful on landscape as it is in dungeon spaces, but it's still noticeable, and it helps kind of make the environments feel richer and more interesting. Let's see. The goat has corgi butt. I have to say, like, this is one of my favorite mounts that has been added recently, the honey goat from the Spring Festival. As soon as the Spring Festival went live, that was like my goal, is I wanted this goat. So that was, I put a lot of my gaming effort when it first came out into that. I was like, I don't need to play an update. I don't need to do anything but get this goat. So Laura Lynn Toll says that she loves it when she gets to North Cotton Farm. So North Cotton Farm is a spot that's a little contentious in my heart right now. I love seeing more additions made to the Shire. I think it's great. I feel where it's positioned isn't integrated into the world particularly well. It kind of feels like it feels like we could have done more to integrate it with Oatbarton and not make it just feel like it was placed up on a cliff. I mean, this is not directly related to the Shire. It is kind of the Oatbarton and the areas surrounding it are technically the Shire, but they're also technically Evendim. But I think that we could have done better things to help North Cotton Farm feel more like a part of the world than it does. Fumasul says, go to Minas Tirith and see how good the game is. Do the same tour there. We'll get there eventually. So my plan is, as long as you all want me to do these, I will keep doing these, and we're going to work our way through Eriador first, and then we'll move on to Rovanion and Gondor and Mordor and wherever else we have left to go by the time we get there. So we are now in the Shire housing neighborhood. I think this is the first region we've been to that has actually had a neighborhood for us to explore. This was a fun area to build. The placement of everything is a little tricky, but as far as building things go, this is definitely a fun space to build. Thinking about it as a village that, you know, every house in the village is owned by someone. You know, trying to have that central focal point. I don't know the extent of polish that was done here when we did the Shire Pass compared to the Bree Pass, because I didn't do the Shire Pass myself. Yeah, I think the one thing, if I had to change anything in this space, and what I would like to do is, you know, take down these high walls if I could. You know, I think we've learned a bit more about the housing system just between what we did with Rohan housing and my own pieces of, you know, prototype and experimentation, that I think having these high walls are not as necessary as we once thought they were. I think while you are in a housing instance, we still need a way for you to, you know, while you're in a neighborhood, we still need to have a way for you to kind of be contained within it. So there's still always going to be some sort of wall. But I think we have a better design mindset and better tools at our hands to make the walls not as high, to not have to rely on fishbowl design like we used to way back in the day when this was first built. Well, thank you for watching, Laurel Lynn. I'm glad that you found us, and everyone else. I'm glad that you found us. Like, these are certainly fun to do, and I'm happy to, you know, be here and talking with you all and answering your questions. So I think we've exhausted the core Shire experience. You know, I don't think we necessarily need to go into every single pub and bar. I highly encourage anyone that is interested to either go on their own or organize a pub crawl themselves through the Shire, or organize a mass mail delivery run. Seems like it'd be a fun event. So let's see. It would be nice to have strolling NPCs in the Rohan neighborhoods as there are in the Shire Thorns Halls. Certainly something we can consider adding if we ever get back to it. I think one of the nice things about the Rohan neighborhoods is the number of houses in them is much smaller than other neighborhoods, so managing and updating them is a little bit easier. Right, Coach. That's kind of what I'm talking about here too. I think we had a very different understanding of how boundaries worked and how the server worked, and honestly what we were comfortable with as far as impassability goes. I think now we're much more comfortable pushing that a little bit more, and I could see us doing things like in the future if we were to ever like truly revamp the Hobbit neighborhood, or develop a new version, a new style of Hobbit neighborhood. These like high walls here, these high impassables all around it, could kind of go away a little bit. We don't really need them like we thought we used to. Yeah, so people are talking about the leveling experience and whether or not crafting is needed, and certainly crafting is not needed. But very, much kudos to the guy that leveled himself up to cap just off of baking. That is certainly impressive. All right, so now that we've gone through, and this is probably going to run a little bit long as well because I want to show you some of these spots. So first stop on this tour of places outside the bounds of the Shire is going to be the Fabled Village. This is where our E3 demo took place. You may have recalled seeing the trailer that starts out hearing about how Mirabella Goldwater snores. Well, this is where it happened. This was all purely for kind of like introductory and cinematic experiences in that trailer. And it doesn't look really as pretty as it might have once looked. And some of this is because, we've done development off in other areas. I believe this is the Hobbit neighborhood is over here, I think. The terrain textures got wiped out. The NPCs that were coloring this space are gone, and it's because a lot of this stuff wasn't necessary for the area. It was kind of in an attempt to kind of reduce disk size. A lot of things were culled out. So this is the little Shire Village. There are a few other ones out there as well. So this location here was meant to be Gamwich. Another Hobbit village further to the west from where we currently have our playable space. Again, like another little simple thing. We have a bounder hanging out here. He's probably I think he's all by his lonesome. But it's honestly like little places like these that helped inspire things like the Wildwood. Knowing that these things exist, might give us ideas down the road as we're running around in a space and we go, oh, I remember doing this here. Another little village. Oh, I don't want to talk to the bounder. Don't make me talk to the bounder. And then the last little village of little unknown village is Longbottom. Again, like we had originally planned for pretty much every Hobbit village and town to be represented when the game was Middle Earth Online, and it was a very different game than it is now. But nothing very exciting or distinct about them because we stopped our efforts on them at a certain point. So yes, we're currently in an inaccessible developer area. Players aren't able to get back here. So those are it for the landscape spaces. I did want to pop into a couple of dungeon interiors as well, as I was just kind of doing my research through things. I came across a couple of interiors, and bear in mind these are very much not complete at all spaces, but just kind of give you a sense of like where often like our dungeons start. Some of we have we have our cave set, with some light deco, and I think this was originally intended to be more of a cave and camp, but I never really got that far. We started working on it, and then the plans for a given area changed, so this interior was just abandoned. It wasn't ever used for anything. I think the original Shire was going to have a much greater goblin presence in it than it originally did. So when there are two maps covering the same area, why are their coordinate systems often different? Asks Thorolor. That is because they are not technically in the exact same physical space. And our tools don't have a way to kind of fake the positional information in that way. So in the case of things like Elder Slade and War of the Three Peaks, those are two very different um, physical locations where you are running around in. It's the same thing with like all the different copies of Minas Tirith. All of the different Helm's Deep instances are all different spaces. So the positional information is going to be different between them. Um, it would be great if we could have a system that kind of resolves that, but it's not something that we've had the time to dedicate resources to doing anything with. Uh, so yeah, this is yet another dungeon space. This is um, one of the spaces that was originally meant to be, I had mentioned there was going to be, some darker content in the Shire, the kidnapping of hobbits and whatnot. Like this is one of the places where that content was going to be hosted. Um, and in doing all of this, I found places that I have never seen before myself. So these are super busted and not really working at all. And I have no clue what they were going to be used for. But let's explore these a little bit. So this is some sort of castle fortress using the castle dungeon set. Right now you can see there's some weird culling stuff going on. I'm not sure what's going on there, but this is, a byproduct of probably both the age of this space and the fact that probably no one has ever even looked at this thing in like 15 years, if not longer. Now that is a very cool throne. I might have to steal that for a design at some point. So the final place that we're going to check out is another space that says it's technically in the Shire. I don't know that I believe it because it feels very elfy to me. This may have been an interior intended for the portions of the Tower Hills that was bordering the Shire. It almost feels a little bit like a museum. I have to be careful because when I was running around here earlier, I kind of stepped through a wall and went into infinite fall mode, so I'm going to stay far away from walls. So yeah, like this stuff like this really shows just how many ideas we have for the game and how many of them, may have had a start and then didn't ultimately end up going anywhere. And this stuff has been floating around forever. We haven't, I don't think anyone's actually ever really thought about this space since, probably 2003. So yeah, with that, that concludes our run through the Shire. I'd like to take a minute and thank you all for coming here and hanging out and asking your questions. Just pause right here real quick and see if you guys have any last minute questions that I can answer before I head out for the afternoon. But definitely, I love doing these things. I'm happy to be able to bring you all a little bit more information about what goes into, making Lord of the Rings and help provide a little bit of extra trivia about the game that you all love and enjoy. So I hope you all had a great time with the anniversary event that we were running over the last, few weeks, and I hope you were able to get all of the fun toys and cosmetics and knickknacks that you were hoping to get out of it. And definitely be looking forward to soon more news about what's coming out for our next update. Last time we did a casual stroll, we gave you a sneak peek of Azanul Bazaar, and that's coming along great, and should be soon ready for you all to get your highs on it in preview. So. So, as a last couple of questions, Vlinderhonge asks, are the old areas going to be used in the future? I never want to say never. There's certainly opportunities where, going back and looking at some of these old places might inspire someone to build something new, or there may be even opportunities to kind of repurpose an existing older thing. Both are certainly possibilities and things that we have done in the past and will likely do again in the future. And we will do Timble's last question as well before I wrap it up. Could we maybe have a demonstration sometime of landscape creating via software at some point? That might be a little bit trickier to do, just because of the way I connect to work. It's certainly something that I can have a conversation about with people internally and see how viable that is, but I can't make any promises that we'll actually be able to do that. Anyways, thank you everyone for joining me this afternoon. I hope you have a great afternoon. I hope that for those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, it's starting to look a little bit more like spring and summer. And for those of you in the South, please stay warm. Have a great afternoon, and I'll see you next time.